Hello, everybody. It's Scott again. These articles that I'm going to refer to in this recording are the ones that you'll write about for the reaction assignment, the comprehension exercise that's due July 19th. And I know I made it clear in the introductory video, but you'll just answer the questions directly on to the quiz sort of template that's there in the July 19th folder. So do let me know if you have any questions there. I'm anticipating that it'll go just fine. But this is what I'm making today, and what you'll be listening to is typical of a screencast that talks about the articles. And these are articles that I've used for a long time. I think they're a good representative sample of the things that we come across with this false memory topic. So I think, again, they strike a balance between being substantive and being readable. I think it's possible for a journal article to be a little bit too dense or too fluffy. In this case, I think that the balance is struck that's very good. And of course, they're somewhat dated now, but they stand as the archetype, the founding sort of article for this sort of research. So, without further ado, we'll mention Loftus and Palmer. Excuse me, I'm getting my notes together here. In one of the opening salvos from the introduction asks, how do we remember details of a complex event like a traffic accident? And how do we know, how well do we do when asked to estimate some numerical quality, such as how fast the cars were traveling? You know, it's amazing how often eyewitnesses are called on, and of course they're largely guessing, and it may be the case that what they're guessing has been influenced by some other party or some other entity than what they actually physically experienced, as we'll see here. So, and again, this is 1974, so this is a fairly new piece of research or a fairly new idea for that time period. So, as she says, or as they say, Loftus and Palmer, it's well documented that most people are inaccurate in reporting numerical details such as time, speed, and distance. For example, most people have difficulty estimating the duration of event with some indication that the tendency is to overestimate. There was a Major League Baseball player, a pitcher, that said people are okay at distance, but one of the things they have trouble with is speed. So if we were standing in an open field that happened to be, say, 200 yards away from a highway, and you ask someone, well, how fast are those cars traveling that are in that field? It would be difficult for people to be accurate. They could be off by 10 or 15 miles per hour. And as we'll see, that's kind of a paramount judgment in this case. So for experiment one, and her introduction is rather brief, although of course I would encourage you to read it because it's the finer points of these articles that may show up in the quizzes. 45 students, groups of various sizes. 7 films were shown, each depicting a car wreck. These films were segments from a driver's ed film borrowed from a particular place in Seattle, which is where they were at the University of Washington in Seattle. The length of the films ranged from 5 to 30 seconds, and following each film, the subjects received a questionnaire asking them to give an account of the accident you just saw, in which one car rear-ended another, and then to answer a series of specific questions about the accident. And the critical question that was kind of buried in there was about the one that interrogated the subject about the speed of the vehicles. Now, if they had asked just one question, the suggestion might be that the participant would have some kind of demand characteristic. They would realize the point of the study and act accordingly. And we wouldn't want that. We want them to have the point of the study to be sort of obscured and buried somewhat. So hence we often litter the environment with apparently irrelevant things to effectively kick dirt over our true purpose. So some of this we've already seen. The critical question was one that interrogated the subject about the speed of the vehicles. 9 subjects were asked, how fast were the cars going when they hit each other? Equal numbers of the remaining subjects were interrogated with smashed, collided, bumped, and contacted. So we can infer that, of course, 45 subjects were used, which they actually said explicitly. The entire experiment lasted a half hour, and the differing ordering of the films was present to each group of participants. So here is the most important slide. Here's the mean speed estimate as a function of how fast the cars were going. And in this case, if they were quoted smashed, how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other? The mean speed estimate was about 40 miles per hour. On the other hand, if it was just contacted, which is a much less severe word, in that case it was roughly 32 miles per hour. And as you can see, as they intended, and it's a terribly neat outcome, the progression is pretty commensurate with the severity of the verb. Contacted to hit, to bumped, to collided, to smashed. And we have a very, very neat outcome. And I should say this at the outset, that I'm aware that not everybody has had statistics, and some of you may not be majors in psychology. And I'm sensitive to that. But what is at the bottom there is an indicant, that F ratio, of statistical significance. And those of you that have had stats will recognize that as being an ANOVA of sorts, although they call it a quasi-F ratio. So in that case, what we would describe this as is statistically significant. In other words, we don't prove things in the social sciences. We have a strong suggestion. And in this case, we have a strong suggestion that the severity of the verb induced higher speed estimates for those participants. So that's kind of interesting. That might beg the question, what if it were the case that the attending police officer, the first person on the scene, used language that was suggestive, like that, smashed versus contacted? Well, it might induce people to say things that are more severe. So, of course, caution is in order, and maybe the thing to do in that case, in lieu of using a verb, would just say, hey, what'd you see? But nonetheless, this, for its time, this was huge. This was clever. This was new. 42 years later, this is not particularly new, and you may argue it's somewhat intuitive, but this is rather pioneering for its time. Okay, so in a second experiment, 150 students, and they have to, you can't begin with a numeral, so they spell it out, participated in an experiment of various sizes. A film depicting a multiple car accident was shown, followed by a questionnaire. It lasted less than a minute, and the accident in the film lasted just 4 seconds. At the end of the film, what we would describe as participants now, the subjects received a questionnaire asking them first to describe the accident in their own words, and then to answer a series of questions. The critical one, which was embedded among others again, interrogated about how the subject about the speed of the vehicles. 50 subjects were asked about how fast were they going when they smashed. The other 50 hit, and then 50 were not interrogated about the vehicular speed. So in this case, I just have smashed, I have hit, and then not asked about the speed, of course, to make a total of 150. In this case, it's a little bit hard to draw people back, but here's what we found. 1 week later, the subjects returned, and without viewing the film again, they answered questions about the accident. And in this case, the speed wasn't particularly invoked. Did you see any broken glass? Which might be attendant with a car accident. To which the subjects answered yes or no. This question was embedded in a list totaling 10 questions, again, to throw them off the scent, if you will. There was no broken glass in the accident, incidentally, since broken glass is, again, typical of accidents occurring at a high speed. We expected that the subjects who had been asked the smashed question might say yes to this critical question. And here is the outcome. So, if here's the distribution of yes and no responses to the question. And you'll see it's 50 in each. If they were cited with the word smashed, then they said yes, there was broken glass. Mistakenly, there was no broken glass. 16 of those 50 reported broken glass. If they got the word hit, it was less than half of that. 7 out of 50 said that they saw broken glass. which was only an eyelash more than the control, in which no speed estimate was evoked. So in that case, that's a critical suggestion. If they were told the word smash, that the cars smashed into each other, in that case 16 saw broken glass, but in either of the other two conditions it was roughly, or actually less than half of that. So a chi-squared again, and that's what that language is at the very bottom there, suggests statistical significance. And again, I don't want to press you on the details of statistical significance, but it's enough to know that it was. So that is pretty darn a heck of an indictment. It's not only the case that they, how to put this, had different speed estimates ranging from roughly 40 to 32 based on the word used. They also tended to see things that weren't there if the word was severe, like smashed. And you can imagine, again, the implications for eyewitness testimony. And many of these things that come from what could be described as basic research in psychology has informed law enforcement and the way that they go about doing their business. So in that case, we would have to be mindful of those sorts of things as we're interviewing witnesses, etc. So I hope you'll agree in their totality that each of these experiments is terribly clever, and that they have a clear agenda. And of course, in this particular publication, the results couldn't have been clearer. Now, I will say that Loftus and Palmer 42 years ago didn't have computers to use. These days we would show these videos on computers and have a lot of neat ways of collecting data. What I mean by neat is just efficient. In those days they probably showed this on some variant of an 8mm projector, and I'm sure it was all quite involved. So we appreciate even more the links that they went to. So her discussion reads, and just to say this, to iterate, we have first of all provided an additional demonstration of something that had been sort of known but not really tested, that the way a question is asked can enormously influence the answer that's given. About how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other led both to higher estimates of speed, and they also had consequences for the questions a week after the event, which would have been that they saw broken glass that wasn't there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just end with just this Loftus and Palmer, frankly just to make sure my recording is working, and then we'll pick up with the other three here in a second.